The Oracle of Luna is a podcast with me, Bridget Engels, as your host. Here we have conversations with real live, present-day goddesses who are actively and courageously doing their magical work in the world. Each episode is a bewitching journey with relevant discussions on topics such as Wiccan pagan spirituality, writing, culture, magical practices, art, ritual, and the craft in its many forms. Hello, listeners! I'm so grateful for the listener interest over the last few years, and I want to keep this podcast inspiring to you with my amazing goddess guests and to amplify the voice of the divine feminine in the world today. This podcast takes time, effort, and resources to share with you every few weeks. I have an ask of you. One of the ways to support the Oracle of Luna podcast is to become a subscriber to premium and bonus material. Each of the podcast episodes have 2 links at the bottom. It's quick and easy, should probably take you 1 minute, and for as little as $3 a month, you can support the show and become a subscriber. I really appreciate it, and it means a lot. Thank you, and blessed be. Merry meet! Welcome to another episode of the Oracle of Luna podcast. I'm Bridget Engels, your host, and today I'm really excited to chat with Tiffany Hopkins. Tiffany has been a year-round resident of Lilydale, New York, since moving into her great-grandmother's cottage in 2018. Tiffany gives mediumship readings and works to share the unique experience of living around people who practice mediumship in Lilydale through Normalized Talking to the Dead, a website, podcast, and residency. Her first book, Beyond, A Living Person's Guide to the Dead, shares her story of moving to Lilydale, a community that shares a rich history of mediumship and healing, and invites readers to find their own approach to mediumship. Tiffany has degrees in cognitive science, interdisciplinary computing, in the arts, music, and business. Welcome, Tiffany!
Hi, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here.
Yeah, I'm so happy that you're here. So, how's your day going or evening?
Oh, it's great. It's Saturday for me, so I have the morning off and went for a long hike with my dog in the rainy, fairly cold woods, and just coming back in and feeling cozy with some tea. So this is a great point to talk at during this day.
Nice. That sounds wonderful. Oh, and to our listeners, Tiffany is going to give us a short meditation on connecting with the world beyond the veil at the very end. So stay tuned, okay? All right. Well, I've got a lot to unpack here. There's so much to talk
Mhm.
about. And so the way I usually start my show is asking, how did your spiritual path begin, or your path as a spiritualist or medium?
Uh, I always think about this and wonder where to start, right? It's so hard to figure out, like, what was the turning point? And, a lot of times, if I do a little wider lens, I won't do the widest lens of like my earliest childhood experiences, but in in my late 20s, I did a lot of traveling. I worked, I went to school abroad and lived in Singapore and traveled in Southeast and South Asia quite a bit and spent a lot of time in India. And um, that had the beginning of what I would call my spiritual awakening there. As I look back, and I hadn't actually put this together until this moment as we're talking about it, but there's something about being surrounded by people who live their spirituality that has always been really impactful for me. And traveling there and going to temples and shrines and communities of seekers and people who had dedicated their lives to their spirituality really had an impact on me. And that was, in 2010, I think I
Mm-hmm.
was doing that sort of travel. So it slowly unfolded. After that, I moved back to the US a few years later and studied with a medicine woman in California, and then moved here to Lilydale, and really started developing mediumship in 2018.
Mm. So is there somebody in your family or do you have a mentor that has influenced you the most on your path as a medium?
Well, in some ways, it's my house that I live in. It was
Yeah.
my great grandmother's house, and it's been passed down through the women in the family. And what's funny is I wasn't really raised religious in any way, even though my dad, who the side of the family, and it's actually my stepdad or my second father, I call him. So it's not a blood relative, but he was raised spiritualist. And while we didn't go to church or anything growing up, I think that mindset of having an open understanding of the universe and knowing that there's more that happens than meets the eye, he really brought that into my life. And so I really credit him and his lineage, so all the women before him who brought me here, into this house and then just gave me in a community that people were doing this all the time and it was normal.
Mm.
That
Yeah.
was really what I think I needed.
So what is Lilydale and what goes on there for our listeners? And can you tell us a bit about the history, why, how it became an intentional spiritualist community?
Sure. So Lilydale, we're an hour south of Buffalo in rural Western New York. This is part of what's been called the burned over district in New York. So there are a
Ah,
lot of different, have you heard of that?
yeah, there's a lot of
Yeah.
spiritualist history in that area and a lot of
Yes.
spiritualist medium and mediumship happening in the mid 1800s, right?
That's right. That's right. And a lot of other religions came out of here as well. The like American religions that were sort of
Mm.
came out of the US, especially around the mid 1800s in the Second Great Revival, I think they call it. And Lilydale started out as a summer camp. People who were considered themselves free thinkers in the mid to late 1800s would come here and practice mediumship and healing, and talk about the changes in the culture that were happening. There was a big tie-in with the suffragette movement and
Mm.
abolition and all the social changes, the labor movement. There's so much social upheaval happening
Yeah.
at that time. And it started as a summer camp, and people came here for days for the first time, and then it slowly evolved to weeks. And this was actually a common thing all over this part of the US was these summer camps where people would come and talk about philosophy. And at the time, they considered healing a science and mediumship a science. And they, practice and talk about their beliefs and talk about how to make positive change in the world. And this just happened to be one that stayed around. And so it started in the 1870s. It became a kind of year-round community in 1890s, like my house was built in the early 1900, like knots. And it wasn't meant to be year-round quite then, but there was a couple buildings. And then it's just slowly evolved into a mostly, I mean, most of the people that are here now are only here in the summer, but there's about 70 of us who live here year round, and there's about 200 homes. We've got a hotel, two hotels, two restaurants, a coffee house, and four churches, spiritualist churches, and a bunch of different venues. So every summer we still have a camp, and we have all different types of speakers and classes and events. Some you buy a ticket for, and some there's a $15 gate fee, and you get, there's like five different mediumship services and a few different healing services that are all free. So it's a place
Mm.
to come and learn and talk about philosophy and mediumship and all these things, just like it was back in the 1870s. So,
That is so
you know,
cool. I
yeah.
had a brush with the Lily Dale. I was out there a long time ago. I don't know, maybe over 10 years ago. I happened to have like a random interview in somewhere in northern Pennsylvania. I don't know, but it
Mhm.
was near Lilydale, and I think I flew in and out of Buffalo, and the driver who was driving me back and forth to my hotel at the time said, "Oh, and that's Lilydale over there." And I'm like, What's Lilydale?" And he kind of gave me a little bit of a lecture on it, and It was just really interesting. It's been in the back of my mind for a long time. And then I saw a film called No One Dies in Lilydale, I
Guys,
believe. It was an
yeah.
HBO film,
Yep.
and I'm just fascinated by the history and the social reform that came out of that era and that time. It was after I guess, around the Civil War, and
Mhm.
there was a lot of people dying, a lot of infant mortality, and I think I read somewhere that the way spiritualism started was that people really wanted to be comforted in their grief and to understand and connect with things that they couldn't see. And there was so much happening at that time just with photography and inventions. And anyway, I'm just that time period just seems really fascinating. And then to have a community, intentional community like Lilydale startup, it's just so cool. Anyway,
It is. And I hope you come visit sometime.
yeah, I'd
It's
love
really,
to.
yeah, it's a really wonderful place to be. It's very unique, I think, in our country as well, because
Yes,
it's just a
yes.
little Victorian village. You can walk around everywhere. And yeah,
A lot of
it's
tourists
really
there, right?
a lot of tourists in the summer. Yes.
Mm,
Even now, it's finally warming up and the snow's melted. So we've got a few people that come on the weekends. And yeah, and the history is absolutely fascinating. I agree. I've read tons of books and have all these book lists because there's just so much going on. And I think there's
yeah,
some parallels to our culture now and just the change because things were
yeah,
changing a lot then and people, trying to figure out how to navigate that. And spiritualism started, like you said, as a way to just continue relationships. It wasn't a religion
yeah,
at first. It was practiced by mostly people who had another religion, usually a form of Protestantism. And they just met in their homes and sat in a circle and waited to see if some message came through from somebody they loved. And I think that's such a beautiful thing as well.
yes. And I read somewhere that most of the mediums, almost all the mediums during that time, and especially the ones that became more famous, like Cora Hatch, they were
Mhm.
women and girls, which is really
Mhm.
interesting because that time period was when the suffragette rights
Mhm.
was starting to happen, and Susan B. Anthony was coming up, and it was just there's a lot of empowerment and social transformation. I find it fascinating because it sounds like a renaissance.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of Lilydale's favorite stories we always tell is that the Chautauqua Institute is near here. I don't know if anybody's heard of that, but it's a similar place, but it's not a religious place, but it's also people go for lectures and to learn in the summer. And sh Susan B. Anthony came to speak there, and they wouldn't allow her to speak because she was a woman, so she came here. And that just really speaks to what Lilydale was about and still is about. And that many of the Susan B. Anthony was not a medium, but people like her were starting to speak about women's rights in public. And at the same time, women mediums were starting to speak in public as mediumship demonstration. And they coincided. And there's a wonderful book called Radical Spirits by Anne Browdy who talks
Hmm.
about this tie-in and how there's a lot of credit is given to mediums for helping pave the way to allow all different types of women to speak in public about all different types of things because it really wasn't permitted before that era, which
Yeah,
is
yeah,
wild to think about.
yeah. And but through mediumship, they found their empowerment, which is
Mhm.
fascinating, I think. And that era was also where like Quakers and Shakers, there's a
Yep.
lot of utopian societies coming about, right? Especially in your area.
Same area. Yep. And actually, one of my favorite people in the spiritualist movement, or it's a couple, Amy and Isaac Post were Quakers, and they're considered radical Quakers, but they really helped bring spiritualism into the zeitgeist, if you will. And they were also very active in abolition and in women's rights, not necessarily suffrage, because they were Quakers, and Quakers aren't involved in politics and they don't vote. But what turned into the suffrage movement and later, they were very involved in. And there's a wonderful book about them too called Radical Friends funny. Both of these are termed radical.
Radical.
Um, yeah. And it talks a lot about how important the Quakers and these other groups were to all these changes that were going on. And again, right in this very area.
Interesting. Getting past the history, let's talk about you and your book. What inspired you to write it? Tell us a little bit about Beyond, A Living
Sure.
Person's Guide to the Dead, and how that
Yeah.
came about.
Well, I did a 2-year program for mediumship and spiritual healing at a church right outside the Lilydale gates called Fellowships of the Spirit. And to graduate from the program, we had to do a research paper. And I was researching channeling and came up with this, um, sort of channeled, I would say, this process for using mediumship for creativity. And really what it was is a combination of my experience learning mediumship and how I did mediumship combined with my experience being a creative person and making art and writing and trying to come up with a process that people could follow. Because I did all this research and everybody, all these books were like, okay, to channel, what you do is you sit and you get quiet and you write, get a pencil and then you open. And I was like, what? I don't know what that means. And I
Yes, that's
really
a
want to
little
know,
vague.
like, what does it mean? So I made this really like um, you know, step by step like approach to explain, like kind of over explain what's happening so that people could read about it or learn about it and try it themselves and figure out how it works for them. And I find mediumship is something that people usually learn it just by doing. And I
Yeah.
think that's a really important part of it. You can't do mediumship without doing mediumship.
Yeah.
But I really wanted more of an understanding of what was happening. And so I did this paper and was talking to a friend about it. And she's like, well, do you want to do a class? She, a friend who runs Morbid Anatomy. And she's like, do you want to do a class? And I did a test circle with some friends and we tried it. And then I started doing a class for Morbid Anatomy called Mediumship for Creativity. And I did that for several years, like 9 iterations of it. This was all through the pandemic. And people really responded to it and really appreciated having just, down on paper, some steps they could follow. And
Yeah.
it's not really about, in the end, following the steps and all of us doing the same thing, but all of us having some common language and understanding about what's happening. And then we'd all talk about it. And it was really fun. And I was like, really wanted a manual for the class. So I wrote it just for the class and then realized, well, there's a lot more here. And so, I was like, well, how about I write some more? And then it ended up being like 12 chapters and all the research about the history and the science and then the how-to part. And then I put some of my story in about what it's like to live here and um, eventually found an editor or an agent and she helped me find a publisher. And it just sort of grew and grew. But really,
Hmm.
my goal is to give people some language, some common language, so that um, anybody can try it and not feel like it has to be necessarily religious or, belong to a specific belief set, but more just, this is what it is. And I think it's a natural human ability to connect beyond,
Yeah, I'd like
you
to
know.
talk about that because
Yeah.
I think a lot of people think, no, I can't be a medium. I don't have psychic abilities. That's a real gift, and only the gifted ones can really do mediumship or psychic mediumship. And so, yeah, I'd like to kind of touch on that. Like, how can somebody who really doesn't know anything about mediumship, how can they simply, at whatever level they're at, kind of connect with their departed ones or spirits beyond the veil? Is there like some way, like,
Yeah.
yeah.
I love that question. And actually, some of the first versions of the book, I really tried to separate out all the exercises and the explanations for people who either did want to do psychic work or didn't want to do psychic work or felt ready for non-psychic work but not ready for psychic work. Like there's a lot of misunderstanding, I think, about what psychic work is, and a lot of
Yeah.
fear. And a lot of people think, yeah, I can't do it. And I do think everybody can do it. I do think it takes a lot of time to develop.
Hmm.
But I think it's really important for everyone to remember that absolutely everyone can connect with especially their loved ones who are departed. And I think it actually is happening in our culture a lot more than we think. And it definitely happened a lot more in other times and in other places. And for me, the foundation for that is an acknowledgement of relationships we have, and that even on the most very basic sense, if you don't believe in that you have any psychic skills, or that anybody continues after death, that spirits live on or anything like that, what we do all have is memories. And we also often have photographs and other objects from our loved ones. And we also have these powerful imaginations. And one of the most important tools for learning mediumship, and if you want to develop into psychic or having additional kind of experiences, is starting with what we all have and feel comfortable with, and that's our memory and imagination. So I always recommend
Mm.
starting with people who we've known when they were alive and we have passed over, and starting with simple things like imagining conversations, reliving memories, writing them letters, really starting to remember what it felt like to connect with them,
Hmm.
and to just kind of reignite that connection, even if it's not like you can't tell they're necessarily talking back and you don't
Yeah.
hear their voices or anything like that. You're bringing them into your awareness and your consciousness in a way that is very natural for pretty much everyone, is to just think about the people we
Yeah.
loved who have died. And
Because
that
we're
is,
keeping them alive that way,
yes,
right?
yes,
And
yep.
there's so much history and mythology and folklore, all in many cultures around the world about ancestor worship
Mm-hmm,
and
mm-hmm.
how the importance of honoring and respecting their ancestors. And I think that's a real big miss in our culture. It's like, well,
Yes.
they're dead, they're gone, that's
Yep.
it, that's all. But really, there's so much more. And there's just honoring and respecting and hearing our departed loved ones and even pets, right?
Right? Oh, absolutely.
Uh,
Absolutely.
yeah, is important. And so, yeah, you have a podcast called Normal.
It's Beyond it. Well, oh my gosh, I changed the name a bunch of times. I've had it for like 5 years and I keep changing the name. Right now it's called Beyond with Tiffany Hopkins.
Okay, before it was like normalizing talking to the
Talking
dead.
to the
So,
dead. Yep.
yeah, so normalizing it. How can we
Yeah.
normalize it, right? By doing it, probably.
That's right. And talking about it. And I do still have normalizedtalkingtothedead.com as my website, and I have all sorts of resources. I put everything I can on there, and a lot of stuff from the book in on there too. And it's, for me, I needed a supportive environment, I think, to be able to open up to something like mediumship. I wouldn't say I was like a full-on skeptic, but it definitely, I'm a bit of a rational person. I'm kind of a nerd and an intellectual person, and there's not um clear I don't have a clear understanding of what's happening, of how I can talk to the dead. And so I really had to suspend my disbelief to get there. And still sometimes I'm like, I have no idea how this works. And the rational part of me gets frustrated with that. And I find being in a supportive community where people both we allow ourselves to have that doubt and
Yeah.
talk about it, but also people are like, yeah, I mean, it just works and we're okay with that. We don't need an explanation. And having people around that don't require, like, the song and dance for explaining why it's okay to do and how it could work and all this stuff, when it comes down to it, we don't know
Well,
really.
having a big supportive community surrounding you would definitely help.
Yes.
Keep it normal when,
Yeah. Yeah.
outside when we're, at work or just driving to work or whatever, doing our chores and errands, we don't think about the dead. We just, we're so consumed with our everyday ego consciousness, but getting out of that and into the spirit realm, you got to carve out the time and
Yes.
it's kind of challenging in,
Yes.
everyday life because I think the other world is kind of it's there, it's always present, but it's pretty challenging to get into that realm,
It is.
right? I
It's
mean,
subtle.
so
It's
subtle.
easy to miss it, and it's easy to ignore and just go about life. There's so much other things to pay attention to that are in our face all the time, and it's very easy to you can just go. I mean, lots of people go through whole lives just ignoring it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
The other day, I mean, this is a weird thing. I was trying to form, like, I was getting some water at night, going to bed, and I was thinking, I was trying to form a phrase, and it was Lord of the Misrule. And it
Ooh.
came into my mind. And then the next day at lunch, I was reading a book, eating my lunch, and it was about Beltane and how the Lord of the Misrule it was a chapter I just opened up, and it was
Ah,
like that kind of popped out to me, that phrase. I'm like, that's coincidental. That's kind of a synchronicity. I don't know how that happens, but I've had those things happen before, and I'm like, hmm,
I love those kinds of things, and it takes paying attention.
yeah,
I think that kind of thing is happening to everybody all the time, and
yeah,
just it's really a matter of how often are we paying attention. And you heard that little tiny flicker of something and you gave it a little bit of your attention. And so then you noticed it again later when it came back. And I actually think that is, a perfect example of how mediumship works too, because a lot of people, and for some mediums, it's different, but my experience has been it's very, very subtle.
yeah.
And it's not like I see a spirit and they're speaking to me in a voice, right? It's these little, like I really experience a lot of my connection through my body, through sensations, through little, just small, just experience happening that if
Yeah.
I'm not paying attention, I would completely miss it. And that's where learning to just notice what we're feeling and what comes up for us, really helps actually, I think, develop our intuition and our psychic skills and our mediumship skills and just our awareness of the world and our experience in it?
And being sensitive
Yes.
to those things and the like you said, it could be auditory or feeling a physical sensation. It could be anything, right? And just or like a
Right.
word or a phrase, like I had that happen
Right.
recently. It could be it's just being sensitive and aware to those things is
Exactly.
so interesting. So, can you tell us a little bit about some of your upcoming plans for the future? Do you have any workshops or new books or classes?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, so much. So Beyond comes out on June 10th. And so I have a
Yay.
ton of stuff. I know I'm so excited. Anybody who's uh, written a book knows, I know you know how much time and effort it takes to
Oh yeah.
get
Yes.
a book out into the world. And this next weekend, I'm going to be in New York City at the Young Center for the Memento Mori conference, which should be really interesting. I'll be in Lilydale the third week of June, and I have a bunch of events here if anybody's going to be here in person. I'm doing a new class with Morbid Anatomy called Transphysical Communication, and that's like a basic communication class on how to talk to the dead, but also anything else that maybe is an atypical communication situation, such as your body or plants or animals or other worldly beings. It's really a kind of foundational communication class.
That sounds cool.
And yeah, I'm really excited about it. I've been working on that. That was sort of why I had to write the book is so I could teach a class like that because it's more than just the creativity part, which is my first series of classes, but this is just a little more general. So I'm excited about that. And then let's see, I'm going to be in San Francisco, LA, and Nevada City, California in June as well. And I've got some events up on the Normalized Talking to the Dead website under events if you're in any of those places.
Cool.
And I would love to,
Yeah.
meet your community.
Yeah. So, what is your website so that people can find out more about you and your offerings?
Yeah, my home on the web is normalizedtalkingtothedead.com. I also have that is my Instagram handle as well at normalizedtalkingtothedead. Those are probably the best places to find out what I'm up to. You can find a link to pre-order Beyond there or wherever you buy your books online. It's very, very much out there, bookshop.org or whatever you like to use. Pre-orders are super helpful to just show some support for the book. So I'd love
Yeah.
if
I want to buy
anybody's
it.
interested.
Definitely.
Yay! That's
And
great.
I'm sure our listeners will too.
I hope so.
So, is it available on Amazon or will be on
Yep.
Amazon?
Yep.
Okay. Okay.
It is. Yeah.
Wonderful. All right. Well, I'm going to let you take it away here to give us what is it, a guided visualization?
Yeah, a little guided meditation,
Okay.
using whatever modality if you like to visualize or, however it is you experience your internal world. And what I'm going to do is a really short way for getting into being open for connection and then closing connection. And for me, it's really important to not just open, but also to close. We don't want to go around all day leaving connections open. So I'll walk you through how I open. I'll give us a couple like just few moments in that. Then we'll wrap it up and close again so that this is something you could try on your own when you have more time. Okay?
Wonderful. All right. Take it
Okay.
away.
So start by taking a deep breath and moving your attention from the external world into your internal space. Taking those breaths, allowing your attention to settle into your body, allowing any feelings, emotions, sensations, thoughts that come up to arise, allowing them to bubble to the surface and evaporate off the top. If there's something you feel like you need to remember for later, allow them to settle down into the bottom and fall out to the side, sitting next to you so that when you're done here, you can go back to them. Freeing up the space within your mind and body to allow for information, communication, wisdom from outside to join you. When you feel settled and really connected in with your body, you can take a moment to open up yourself to a communication or a contact, a being, a loved one who's in spirit, allowing yourself to create space for information from them to come in. And if you don't have a specific person in mind, you can open up the connection with a clear and matched energy. So if you are feeling in a state of openness and love, saying that only that which comes with openness and love may join me here today. Giving yourself a little bit of time and space, a moment to see what comes in. Bringing your attention into your body in that quietness. Noticing any feelings, thoughts, sensations, words that emerged now, knowing that there is the potential for them to have come from outside of yourself in this opened state. Taking another deep breath, bringing all of your attention back into your body again. We'll prepare to close. Again, we did a very quick cycle through opening. Now we want to say thank you to anyone or thing who came to join us for any information, wisdom, ideas, anything that may have come to us in that moment. Bringing our attention back into ourselves, closing that connection by focusing our connection in with our own bodies, really allowing everything outside of us to fall away again, bringing all of our awareness and focus inside ourselves, noticing how we feel compared to how we felt when we were open and compared to how we felt before we started. Allowing that change to settle. Taking a moment to thank ourselves for showing up, for creating a space for us to connect. And when we're ready, we can begin to deepen our breath, prepare our senses to take in the external world, open up the eyes again, and potentially go about the rest of our day.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Tiffany. And thanks for coming on the show and sharing your experiences and your perspectives on mediumship and helping us understand how we can connect with the spirits on the other side of the veil. And
You're so welcome.
yeah, and I just loved hearing about Lilydale. It's such a cool place. And for all our listeners out there, please check out Tiffany's book and also maybe Google Lilydale and find out
Yeah.
more about this fascinating community, spiritualist community and all the history. I think it's just really, really cool. So thanks again.
Thank you so much. It's been so wonderful to talk with you and have this meaningful and deep conversation just so quickly. I really appreciate it. And I hope you come to Lilydale sometime. You'll
Oh,
have
I'd
to let
love
me
to.
know.
Yeah.
And yeah, thank you everybody for listening.
Yeah. Thanks again to our listeners. And until next time, I'm signing off. So thanks again, Tiffany. Bye bye.
Bye.